Hey everyone, Mend here. I'm going to go ahead and make a video here today because I get a lot of questions on how to analyze discipline priest logs, or at least how I do it. Um, every, uh, I guess, major guild or progression guild uses Warcraft logs to log their kills. So if you're not already doing that, or if your guild's not already doing that, I'd highly recommend to go to the link, and I'll have it in the description. Um, to where you can get started using Warcraft logs if you're already not. I'm assuming that you already do have experience with Warcraft logs and have used it in the past minimally, but may need a little bit of help finding out a little bit more information on how to look at a discipline priest log. Um, so getting that out of the way, I'll go ahead and get into some information here as far as how I would analyze one of my own logs. So now I'm going to be analyzing a log where I probably didn't do a whole lot wrong. There's probably going to be a few things throughout the process that I'll find that I did do wrong. Um, I'm looking at one of my better Ursoc mythic kills, mainly because Ursoc's very easy to dissect. Um, and I wanted to show how a good log looks rather than looking at one of my worst or not as good logs first off. So what I normally do is I look first at damage taken and then per ability. So during Ursoc, the abilities that I handle healing, and so what I'm really trying to find out is how I healed this attempt. So looking at the abilities here, barreling impact is the charge ability that Ursoc does. This is going to vary depending on what fight you did, but for me, in this situation, I'm going to be looking at barreling impact from Ursoc. And then what you do, so obviously it shows this bar here, or these bars here. Um, you'd want to pin those because if you go to another page, those will disappear. So the way that you do that is you scroll all the way to the bottom under total, and you click the little plus button, and then you get your damage ability showing in the green bars above. So after you do that, the next thing that I would do normally, um, it would depend if you're wanting to look at a large swath of information or just a few pieces of information here and there. If you're just concerned about timing of your atonements, you can show that. I'm going to show a few other things because it's good to see kind of how you can look at other people's logs and figure this out. So I go to resources here and I switch it to mana, and then I will pin my mana like so. So I can see where my mana was throughout this encounter fairly easily while looking at when these damaging abilities come out. And notice I was essentially out of mana here at the end. We were 3 healing Mythic Ursoc. Um, so my mana did drop after each burst. After that, the next thing that you'd want to do, and this is probably the most important piece, um, and you can ignore using the mana portion. I like to see where my mana was at any part of a given fight, um, along with looking at the atonements that were out. In order to see the atonements that were out, you'd want to go to buffs, click all abilities. Under A, there's atonement, and it gives you this weird multicolored bar, really not very helpful. However, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on stacked, it's a much easier to see graph of how many atonements were out. Now, I did have one innervate at the beginning of the fight, so I was able to get up to 20 atonements, and it helped me keep a higher amount of atonements throughout the encounter and also to cover more bursts. So the first thing you want to really look at is, okay, well, I started off here with 10 atonements, um, as you can see. So what that means is I started going into the encounter stacking up some atonements. One strategy a lot of people use is to throw out some power word radiances. Once the timer starts down from 10, you can cast maybe 2 or 3. Um, sit down, drink, get a couple ticks of drinking, so you're back up to about 100% mana, and then you can pre-pot And then you go into the encounter with about 10, maybe a little bit more atonements, which really does help if there's instant damage that comes out or you need to heal going into it. You start off with a higher number of atonements. As you see, it goes through. My atonement stacks get up to about 20 right before the burst. Burst comes out, atonements drop down, which is typical. You don't obviously can't maintain 20 atonements throughout the encounter. Drops it back down to about 10. Because I did get an innervate, I was able to keep up a higher amount of atonements. So you'd probably drop down to closer to 5 or so, um, depending on if you do have an innervate or not, or if you have mana trinkets or what have you. So your mana will determine how much you can do this. Ursoc is a very burst heavy fight, mind you, so you typically will go it's very spiky. You'll go up and down throughout the encounter. Um, I didn't quite get up to 20 atonements here, which I wish I would have. That probably would have got a better parse, but really it doesn't matter. We killed the boss, um, and I still got a pretty decent parse regardless. Um, so like obviously you can see here, every single burst I spike up. May I'll be a little bit off in timing here. It looks like I got 20 stacks late, maybe 18 stacks late. Here got to 20, and I was a little early on this last one, but I think I got innervate right around here. The way that you can tell is if you go to, we'll have to close out of this, I'll have to go back into that, but you go here, back up to abilities, innervate is what you want to look for. So you go under I, click on innervate, and you can see right here is where the innervates were. They were both on me. So we'll go ahead and click that, and we can see where the innervates were. Let's see, I'll go ahead and show some casts here too. There's a couple things I want to show. So we'll click on me. We will pin our smite casts. And Halo. So that's another problem with this. I did not cast Halo early on, which I could have very easily right in this area, probably during the first or second burst, and I did not. So that is actually one mistake that I did have. Halo is extremely good during a burst rotation. So let's pull back up our buffs here. Go back to Atonement. Now that I pinned the couple things I wanted to see. And it's going to give us, no. So it's giving me 1 bar, which is not what I want because right now I'm selected. So if that happens, you can unselect yourself. Scroll back down. Now you got your multicolored bar. And I have a, hopefully that goes away. It's not going away. Let me refresh. Bloopers. Okay. Now, got what we need. Multicolored bar. Click on stacked. Okay. So notice I did use it for a burst here, and that was well timed. So I'm looking at Halo usage. So here's where I had 20 atonements out. I started off with Halo. Probably got good Halo usage out of it. Here is after burst with relatively low atonements out. So that was probably a bad time to use Halo. So what I would do going on in the future is just keep a mental note. Okay, if I'm going to use this Halo, and if it's up, I'll use it here or here, not in this weird lull area in between. Reason I show smite and the innervate just kind of shows us where you had that innervate. First innervate was good. The other one I think was a little late. No, it was about on time, about right when you had it up, and it was just right at the end there because it's about 3 minutes. It's a 3-minute cooldown, so probably would have ended here about 30-second mark. I got it about 3:30, so actually pretty good timing. It was a shorter fight because we did stack DPS for a faster kill. But if you look at the smites here, this is what I wanted to show. Note how I don't smite much during non-burst phases. I'm going to close out the mana here. Just because it's necessarily, these are things that we don't really need to look at because I already kind of saw where my mana was and I was already pretty much empty around 3 minutes. But note how I'm only smiting Yeah, in some cases I'm smiting in between, depending, but I'm really reserving smites for only my bursts. That's very important, especially if you don't have innervate on a fight like Ursoc, where there's not a lot of damage in between. There are roars, which um, they're relatively weak compared to the charges. The charges are going to be the major bulk of your healing. You do have some residual atonements that do kind of linger coming out of these bursts, but mostly you'll be looking at the charges for Ursoc. Other fights obviously are going to be a lot different, which could vary how you're going to use your smites. Because if you have over 8 atonements, you should be smiting. Using smite and penance, but you'd fill with smite at that point. If you're under 8 or around 5, it's typically not worth using smite unless there is a good enough amount of damage coming out to where it will help heal those 5 people you have it on. Most cases, it's not worth using um, unless you have 8 atonements out or more. So just wanted to note these are 2 abilities you really use during a burst and leave it to when you have higher amount of atonements out. And then you kind of just let your lull be where you're kind of casting some pleas if you need to, keeping Power Word Shield on the tank on cooldown, etc. So the next thing I like to look at, so I've got a good idea of how I use my abilities, um, and where my atonements were, my timing of my bursts. This is a really good way to look at the fight, Ursoc fight itself. The only other thing I really like to look at, just because it's is relatively important, if you go to damage done and you scroll down here, you look at me, click on Purge the Wicked. You always want to look at your Purge the Wicked uptime. It's free, essentially free healing. The higher uptime you can have on this, the more it's going to benefit you. So always look at your uptime for Purge the Wicked. I had 97%, which is anything over 95 or so is relatively good. Obviously, the closer to 100, the better, but you're not always going to have 100. There's going to be times where it does fall off for a few seconds. So as far as Ursoc's concerned, that is basically how I look at everybody's Ursoc kills, depending on what the exact needs are. If somebody's struggling with one thing or another, you can always use the same exact idea of just pinning the ability or the damage or what have you. You pin that to your main page, and then you can look at everything at a glance. The only thing you cannot pin is your atonements. However, there is a way to do that if you'd like to see that and travel between screens. If you go to abilities under buffs, go to abilities under S, you go to Sins of the Many. You can see that it's less colorful. You don't get, it's essentially the same exact graph, but you can pin that. So up to you how you want to see it. Personally, I like to see the multicolored graph, and I like to see the number of stacks a little bit better than this, because when you pin it, it doesn't show. So it's really up to you how you want to look at your graphs, but basically that's about it as far as how I would look at Ursoc. The one thing you want to make sure of is every time you look at what damage um, taken you're looking at, you would just want to look at obviously fight specific. So for Nithendra, you look at the rots coming out, the volatile rots. Cenarius, you could look at thorn damage. And when the wisps come out, I'm not sure how that shows up. I haven't looked at Cenarius recently, but you look at what those damaging abilities are. Look when they come out. Look where your atonements are compared to that, and try to compare that of your atonements to someone else's to see if you can maximize how you're playing. It's really good to kind of look side by side at your performance with someone else's. So hopefully this video helped clear some things up. I'm really glad to do more of these types of videos in the future, and I think we will be. But I just wanted to get one thing out there as far as at least one video rather out there for everybody to kind of get an idea of how I look at logs and how a lot of other disc priests look at logs.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and comment on the next kind of video that you want to see. Also be sure to join us in Discord.